You are listening to The Brycen Show, episode 002 of the History Series. Tonight, we will be talking about Yamashita's gold. From Wikipedia, Yamashita's gold, also referred to as the Yamashita treasure, is the name given to the alleged war loot stolen in Southeast Asia by Japanese forces during World War II and hidden in caves, tunnels, and underground complexes in the Philippines. It is named for the Japanese general Tomoyuki Yamashita, nicknamed the Tiger of Malaya. Though accounts that the treasure remains hidden in the Philippines have lured treasure hunters from around the world for over 50 years, its existence is discounted by most experts. The rumored treasure has been the subject of a complex lawsuit that was filed in a Hawaiian state court in 1988 involving a Filipino treasure hunter, Rogelio Roxas, and the former Philippine president, Ferdinand Marcos. Prominent among those arguing for the existence of Yamashita's gold are Sterling Seagrave and Peggy Seagrave, who have written 2 books relating to the subject: The Yamato Dynasty, The Secret History of Japan's Imperial Family, and Gold Warriors, America's Secret Recovery of Yamashita's Gold. The Seagraves contend that looting was organized on a massive scale by both Yakuza gangsters such as Yoshio Kodama and the highest levels of Japanese society, including Emperor Hirohito. The Japanese government intended that loot from Southeast Asia would finance Japan's war effort. The Seagraves alleged that Hirohito appointed his brother, Prince Yasuhito Chichibu, to head a secret organization called Kin no Yuri, the Golden Lily, for this purpose. It is purported that many of those who knew the locations of the loot were killed during the war, or later tried by the Allies for war crimes and executed or incarcerated. Yamashita himself was executed by the U.S. Army for his war crimes on February 23, 1946. The stolen property reportedly included many different kinds of valuables looted from banks, depositories, temples, churches, other commercial premises, mosques, museums, and private homes. It takes its name from General Tomoyuki Yamashita, who assumed command of Japanese forces in the Philippines in 1944. According to various accounts, the loot was initially concentrated in Singapore and later transported to the Philippines. The Japanese hoped to ship the treasure from the Philippines to the Japanese home islands after the war ended. As the war in the Pacific progressed, U.S. Navy submarines and Allied warplanes inflicted increasingly heavy sinkings of Japanese merchant shipping. Some of the ships carrying the war booty back to Japan were sunk in combat. The Seagraves and a few others have claimed that American intelligence military operatives located much of the loot. They colluded with Hirohito and other senior Japanese figures to conceal its existence, and they have used it to finance American covert intelligence operations around the world during the Cold War. These rumors have inspired many hopeful treasure hunters, but most experts and Filipino historians say there is no credible evidence behind these claims. In 1992, Imelda Marcos claimed that Yamashita's gold accounted for the bulk of the wealth of her husband, Ferdinand Marcos. Many individuals and consortia, both Philippine and foreign, continue to search for treasure sites. A number of accidental deaths, injuries, and financial losses incurred by treasure hunters have been reported. At present, the Mines and Geosciences Bureau of the Department of Natural Resources of the Philippines is the Filipino government agency that grants treasure permits. University of the Philippines professor Rico Jose has questioned the theory that treasure from mainland Southeast Asia was transported to the Philippines. By 1943, the Japanese were no longer in control of the seas. It doesn't make any sense to bring in something that valuable here when you know it's going to be lost to the Americans anyway. The more rational thing would have been to send it to Taiwan or China. Philippines National Historical Institute chairman and historian Ambeth Ocampo commented, "Two of the wealth myths I usually encounter are the Yamashita treasure and gossip that the Cojuangco fortune was founded on a bag of money, and that's a soda drink company in the Philippines. Ocampo also said, "For the past 50 years, many people, both Filipinos and foreigners, have spent their time, money, and energy in search of Yamashita's elusive treasure." Professor Ocampo noted, "What makes me wonder is that for the past 50 years, despite all the treasure hunters, their maps, oral testimony, and sophisticated metal detectors, nobody has found a thing." This next article is from Voltaire.net, www.voltaire.net .org/Golden Lily Operation. After the 1930s, while the Japanese Imperial Army looted Southeast Asia, Emperor Hirohito launched the Golden Lily Operation, aimed at recovering and hiding his war booty. At the end of World War II, U.S. General MacArthur's troops took hold of the treasure and raised funds to finance the struggle against communism. Yamashita's gold, considered a simple legend for many years, allows you to understand how the Japanese Democratic Liberal Party, despite the great corruption of its elite, kept in exclusive control of the Japanese democracy for half a century. This is part 3 of a series of articles on Japanese war criminals, their links with the mafia, their political power, and the American support they received to commit their misdeeds, under the pretext of fighting against communism. The History of Democracy advocates, in 1895, Quinn Min was burned alive by a group of murderers of the Black Ocean Society, an ultra-nationalist group led by legendary Mitsuru Toyama. The operation, aimed at destabilizing the Korean government, constituted one of the elements of the conquering strategy used by the Japanese Secret Service, designed in conjunction with the Yakuzas of Toyama. The assassination of the Queen gave rise to the incident that justified the progressive invasion against Korea. In 1905, the country became a protectorate of Japan. The ultra-nationalist societies began the looting operations, while the underworld chiefs took on key positions. With the support of the imperial government, Ryohei Uchilada, chief of the Black Dragon Society and Toyama's right hand, put together the militias in charge of extorting money from Korean rich families. In 1910, Korea was fully annexed. The military chief, General Yamagata, commissioned Terauchi to undertake the secret police activities, which had initially been established by Black Dragon. The Kampotai carefully arranged the plundering of the territory with the support of the Toyama and Uchida's militias. Officially, Japan attempted to project Southeast Asia from the Western settlers by founding a sphere of joint prosperity. The Japanese imperial dynasty really oversaw the ongoing plundering of the country. Stealing gold and masterpieces. They valued Celadon porcelain, destroying the cultural heritage, Buddhism temples, with the clear intention of doing away with the Korean identity. A similar system was established in Manchuria under the command of Nobusuke Kishi and the Yakuza societies. The annexed territory enabled Japan to control the access by sea to the commercial ports in the north of China. The puppet government was then under the domain of the Tairiki Ronin, officers, chief warriors, drug traffickers. Entrepreneurial Yakuzas made up true private armies to plunder territories on behalf of the emperor, for they formed an alliance with the Chinese patrons of the Green Band to control the distribution networks of opium and its byproducts. Ryuichi Sasakawa and Yoshiyoko Dama therefore amassed great fortunes, which at the end of the war would allow them to finance the creation of the almighty Liberal Democratic Party. The chiefs of these groups of criminals with expeditious methods were Nobusuke Kishi and his clan, which included General Hideki Tojo, chief of the secret policy and future prime minister of the government during the war years, Hoshino Naoki, chief of the opium monopoly, Matsuwako Yasuki, chairman of Mansetsu Corporation, and Aikawa Jasuki, Nissan leader. They planned the looting operations with the complicity of the emperor. They founded the Manchu's Heavy Industry Company, an organization that coordinated the development of the industry and concentrated the booty that the army and the Yakuzas had looted from the local population. through the use of different methods such as demanding ransoms, extorting money, and robbing banks. Plundering was controlled by the Japanese Empire Princes, Golden Lily Operation. The conquering obsession upset Western leaders, who feared that Japan might interfere in their own colonies and concessions. In 1936, in the midst of the full plundering of Korea, the Japanese strategists hesitated between two choices. One of the tactics was to take control of Siberia, a territory with abundant natural resources, to set up a security area in front of the Soviet Union, main rival in the region. This anti-communist strategy had the merit of pleasing one part of the West elite. For this purpose, the ambassador to London, Yamashita, attempted to set up an alliance with the British, resorting to the support of the Clevedon Group. Several ultra-conservatives in the United States, like former President Herbert Hoover or the Nazi pilot Charles Lindbergh, and officers, I don't know what that's about, and officers close to General MacArthur favored an understanding with the imperial dynasty. Prince Chichibu, Hirohito's brother, traveled to London in 1936 to arrange a potential Anglo-Japanese alliance. It was likely that the possibility to create an anti-communist front seduced the British diplomats. However, the advance of the Japanese troops in Asia threatened the European powers' colonies. Very soon, Chichibu was deprived of every means of negotiation. The army was totally out of control in China. In 1937, several officers were plotting the Marco Polo incident in China, which resulted in the invasion of the country by the Japanese troops with the unofficial support of the emperor. Prince Chichibu declined the already obsolete idea of setting up an Anglo-Japanese alliance and flew to Nuremberg, where Chancellor Adolf Hitler was participating in a meeting. When President Franklin Roosevelt declared that he wanted to put an end to the conquering obsession of Japan, the invading army was getting ready to commit an unprecedented massacre ordered by an imperial prince. As a matter of fact, Prince Kano, a moderate prime minister, commissioned Prince Asaka to head the Nanking army. The latter ordered his troops not to leave any prisoner in the city. For days, the soldiers followed his orders very strictly. Tens of thousands of Chinese were murdered under horrifying circumstances in the face of many West witnesses. The soldiers used men as mannequins to learn how to use the bayonet, and officers as a way to practice the beheading rituals. Women and girls were victims of collective rapes in front of their families. In the meantime, Princes Chichibu and Takeda made sure that the booty of the plundering ended up in the hands of the imperial dynasty. The experts audited every banking document, while the secret police tortured every suspect of having information on Nanking's gold and fortune. The Japanese prince and General Chichibu, Hirohito's brother, visited a colony of Boy Scouts. To make sure that the army did not unnecessarily squander the plundered products, I don't know where the hell that came from. To make sure that the army did not unnecessarily squander the plundered products, Hirohito set up the Golden Lily, an organization that gathered experts in money extortion, accountants, finance professionals, etc., Yakuza chiefs, and powerful industrialists under the command of imperial princes, the only people the emperor fully trusts in. Prince Chichibu was in charge of supervising the entire group. In 1941, the regime of Philippe Pétain authorized Japan to occupy the north of Indochina. Prince Kano favored a negotiated peace, but he was unable to convince Hirohito, and he resigned. The emperor, determined to declare war, appointed General Tojo in his place, who was one of the men of the Kishi clan that masterminded the systematic plundering of Manchuria. The surprise attack against Pearl Harbor was a sign that unleashed a Japanese offensive in Southeast Asia, the quote-unquote surprise attack. Japan invaded Thailand, Sumatra, Burma, occupied Guam and Hong Kong. Japan also expelled General MacArthur from his feud in the Philippines. The new annexed territories were systematically plundered by the Kempeitai. Prince Chichibu established the general headquarters of Golden Lily in Singapore, where the entire booty was sent to be inventoried by specialists. In the Philippines, the western banks were the main target of the Golden Lily experts, who took possession of the Philippines' treasure to benefit Yokohama Specie Bank, whose main shareholder was Hirohito himself, and the Bank of Taiwan, another state bank. Part of the gold was used to finance the war. Swiss, Portuguese, Argentinian, and Chilean banks were in charge of the laundering. The fortune stolen by the Kempeitai and the Golden Lily agents was taken to Singapore and then to Manila to be eventually sent to Japan. After the Battle of Midway, the balance of military forces in Southeast Asia moved towards the United States. Japan lost control of sea routes. Hirohito and the imperial princes began to think of a potential defeat of the empire. From then on, Golden Lily operation, headed by Chichibu, who officially underwent a tuberculosis treatment in the base of Mount Fuji, consisted of saving the war booty stuck in Manila. Firstly, Chichibu had used the hospital ships to transport the gold that was later on put in underground deposits built in the Japanese mountains. In 1943, that solution was not applicable anymore since the United States was in a position to impose an effective maritime blockade. The fortune began to pile up in the Manila harbor. Prince Chichibu then put together a group of engineers specialized in the construction of underground nets and began to conceal the booty in underground hiding places. In Manila, he used the underground systems of Intramuram, an old Spanish city that provided great storage capacity. A gallery that followed a discreet transfer of goods connected the harbor directly with Intramuro. Chichibu selected historical places like churches, universities, and a whole series of places where the bombing risk was minimal. Prince Takeda used caves and supervised the construction of tunnel nets in the north of Manila. Specialists set up big quantities of ingenious and terribly effective traps: bombs, cyanide capsules, water and sand traps. Another prince, Takahito Osaka, son of the perpetrator of the Nanking slaughter, and General Yamashita, hero of the Singapore actions, were sent to the Philippines to face the imminent U.S. attack and participate in burial operations. Engineers and slaves were constantly buried alive. When MacArthur began the reconquering of the Philippines, the princes tried to quickly hide what they had not been able to bury yet. Ships loaded with gold were sunken with their crews on board. After Japan's defeat, that finished its occupation with the slaughter of civilians in Manila. The princes escaped in submarines. The American Secret Services knew about the Golden Lily operation since 1945. John Ballinger, an agent disguised as a fisherman, could observe the unloading of boxes full of gold that had been carried in a hospital ship. MacArthur arrested its rival, Yamashita, and entrusted one of his own agents the mission to interrogate Major Kojima, the Japanese general's driver. Severino Garcia Santa Romana obtained numerous pieces of information on Yamashita's itineraries, and in this way he was able to locate several hiding places. Santi became then the guardian of Yamashita's treasure. He remained at the beginning under the command of MacArthur until the enigmatic Edward Lansale, former agent of the OSS, who had recently joined the G2 services of General Willoughby, took command of the operations. After submitting the issue to President Truman, they decided that the recovered booty would be used to raise money to create a fund against communism known as Black Eagle. The project, conceived by an advisor to Roosevelt, consisted of using the gold stolen by Germany, Italy, and Japan to finance pro-American governments, and consequently to manipulate, with the use of money, elections in the core of several democracies threatened by the Red Danger. With the help of Robert Anderson, a money laundering specialist, the gold that Santee had recovered was dispersed in 170 bank accounts opened in 42 countries. The banking network of the CIA allowed therefore to hide, again, the fortune stolen from Southeast Asia and to keep the gold prices at a convenient level for the economic interests of the United States. The booty seized by the American authorities was deposited in 3 different secret funds at the beginning. The Yotsuya Fund financed the most unthinkable activities of MacArthur's right hand, the boss of G2, Charles Willoughby, admirer of General Franco and of the fascist police methods. The second fund, baptized with the name of Joseph Keenan, prosecutor at the Tokyo trial, Japanese equivalent to the Nuremberg trial, had a very precise function: to bribe witnesses to exonerate the members of the imperial dynasty who had become MacArthur's allies in the struggle against communism. The Tokyo trial was a true farce that ended up in the hanging of a handful of scapegoats. Prince Osaka, perpetrator of the Nanking massacres, was not even summoned, while General Matsui, accused of a crime in which he didn't participate, was sentenced to hang. Yamashita, General MacArthur's great rival, had the same fate. He was condemned for slaughtering civilians in Manila. General Tohoto was found as main guilty and forced to take on, I don't know, sometimes, I don't know about this writing, and forced to take on responsibility for the war instead of Emperor Hirohito. The most strategic fund was certainly the M Fund, dedicated to the financing of the fight to prevent communists or socialist democrats from taking over power in Japan. After the war, an ephemeral socialist government was quickly discredited, thanks to the financing of the M Fund by the United States favorite Shigeru Yoshida. This fund was also used to finance an official history about the Japanese defeat. That was the way in which Yoshio Kodama published his memoirs, I Was Defeated. The book, financed by the CIA with the M Fund, was good to exonerate the future Japanese strongmen, ultranationalists supported by General MacArthur, such as Ryoichi Sasakawa and Nobusuke Kishi. The peace treaty is signed in 1951. Article 14 provided that Japan didn't have the necessary resources to indemnify its victims. The existence of the Golden Lily, which turned into the Black Eagle, had to remain a secret. After 1952, a board, headed by CIA members and the Japanese Secret Services, became responsible for the M Fund. Thanks to the fund, Nobusuke Kishi, head of the Manchuria plundering and former minister of Tojo's war government, won the election. Eisenhower's administration liked the extremely anti-communist war criminal. The M Fund financed the election of several prime ministers, such as Kakui Tanaka, Noboru Takashita, Yasuhiro Nakasone, and Miyazawa Kiichi. Tanaka, to whom Nixon had promised the exclusive administration of the M Fund, resorted very often to finance elections and dirty maneuvers. Part of the Golden Lily money was invented in Japan and was squandered by those who decided who was to be the future prime minister, selected from the Liberal Democratic Party membership, which monopolized the power during 50 years. So the Marcos clan was a new guardian of the Golden Lily. Many hiding places could not be controlled by Santee and MacArthur's services in the Philippines. Marcos, Washington's turbulent protege, won the 1965 elections thanks to the Yamashita's gold. Since the 1960s, Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos tried to contact Santee, the legendary guardian of the Golden Lily. Knowing that Santee had numerous bank accounts, they thought that some of them might have been forgotten by the CIA and they wanted to control them. When Santee died in 1974, Marcos became the new unofficial guardian of the Golden Lily and cooperated this way with American and Japanese teams. To locate the hiding places, the dictator used Ben Valmores, a Philippine peasant that had been Prince Takita's servant. Marcos was able to accumulate important quantities of gold, but the search operations were very complicated. The easiest thing was to ally with Japanese people that knew the location of the hiding places. Marcos resorted to Ryoichi Sasakawa, a war criminal and Mussolini's admirer, who then became part, after the Japanese defeat, of the restricted circle of new masters on Japan. Sasakawa was the ideal partner. He discreetly withdrew the gold deposited in the Lubang Island and probably carried out the money laundering through his Philippine-Japanese Mutual Aid Association. At the beginning, Washington that supported Marcos and Sasakawa's anti-communist activities turned a blind eye. However, Marcos sought to work on his own and recruited two partners. A clairvoyant who claimed to have located, thanks to his gifts, the remains of the Nazi ship, and a specialist in metallurgy. Robert Curtis would be in charge of sanctifying the gold. In other words, he would have to find the means to adapt the booty so that it could be used in the world market without attracting people's attention. To finance his facilities, Curtis resorted to the John Birch Society, an extreme right group specialized in anti-communist operations, which had Colonel Lawrence Bunker among its members. Bunker, in his capacity as former collaborator of MacArthur, was aware of the existence of the Golden Lily. When President Reagan planned to return to the gold standard, he asked Marcos to share part of his reserves. The dictator's greed would be his misfortune. Paul Wolfowitz, in his capacity as Undersecretary of State, ordered the American Secret Services to kidnap Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos, and they were sent to exile in Hawaii. Marcos's reserves would have been sent to the United States. Many people still continue to covet the booty of the Golden Lily, the result of more than 50 years of systematic plundering of Southeast Asia by Japan. According to Sterling and Peggy Seagrave, since March 2001, the Bush administration, with Paul Wolfowitz as Secretary of Defense, has sent commands to the Philippines to recover part of Marcos's revenues and to supervise new excavations. The control of what remains of Yamashita's gold is still an extremely important objective for those interested in accepting the full disclosure of the existence of the Golden Lily. The access to the files on the Black Eagle Fund was under the strictest control by the CIA. The victims of the murders of the Imperial Army and their heirs that, in an entirely legitimate way, dared to request compensations, are still today the butt of everyone's jokes. Officially, Yamashita's gold is a legend. Now we're going to return to Wikipedia. In March 1988, a Filipino treasure hunter named Rogelio Roxas filed a lawsuit in the state of Hawaii against the former president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, and his wife Imelda Marcos for theft and human rights abuses. Roxas claimed that in Baguio City in 1961 he met the son of a former member of the Japanese army who mapped for him the location of the legendary Yamashita treasure. Roxas claimed a second man who served as Yamashita's interpreter during the Second World War told him of visiting an underground chamber there where stores of gold and silver were kept, and who told of a golden Buddha kept at a convent located near the underground chambers. Roxas claimed that within the next few years he formed a group to search for the treasure, and obtained a permit for the purpose from a relative of Ferdinand, Judge Pio Marcos. In 1971, Roxas claimed he and his group uncovered an enclosed chamber on state lands near Baguio City where he found bayonets, samurai swords, radios, and skeletal remains dressed in a Japanese military uniform. Also found in the chamber, Roxas claimed, were a 3-foot-high golden-colored Buddha and numerous stacked crates which filled an area approximately 6 by 6 feet by 35 feet. He claimed he opened just one of the boxes and found it packed with gold bullion. He said he took from the chamber the golden Buddha, which he estimated to weigh 1,000 kilograms, and one box with 24 gold bars, and hid them in his home. He claimed he resealed the chamber for safekeeping until he could arrange the removal of the remaining boxes, which he suspected were filled with gold bars. Roxas said he sold 7 of the gold bars from the open box and sought potential buyers for the golden Buddha. 2 individuals representing prospective buyers examined and tested the metal in the Buddha, Roxas said, and reported it was made of solid 20-karat gold. It was soon after this, Roxas claimed, that President Ferdinand Marcos learned of Roxas' discovery and ordered him arrested, beaten, and the Buddha and remaining gold seized. Roxas alleged that in retaliation to his vocal campaign to reclaim the Buddha and the remainder of the treasure taken from him, Ferdinand continued to have Roxas threatened, beaten, and eventually incarcerated for over a year. Following his release, Roxas put his claims against Marcos on hold until Ferdinand lost the presidency in 1986. But in 1988, Roxas and the Golden Buddha Corporation, which now held the ownership rights to the treasure Roxas claims was stolen from him, filed suit against Ferdinand and wife Imelda in a Hawaiian state of court seeking damages for the theft and the surrounding human rights abuses committed against Roxas. Roxas died on the eve of the trial, but prior to his death he gave the deposit testimony that would be later used in evidence. In 1996, the Roxas estate and the Golden Buddha Corporation received what was then the largest judgment ever awarded in history, $22 billion, which with interest increased to $40.5 billion. In 1998, the Hawaii Supreme Court held that there was sufficient evidence to support the jury's finding that Roxas found the treasure and what Marcos converted it. However, the court reversed the damage award, holding that the $22 billion award of damages for the chamber full of gold was too speculative, as there was no evidence of quantity or quality, and ordered a new hearing on the value of the Golden Buddha and 17 bars only. After several more years of legal proceedings, the Golden Buddha Corporation obtained a final judgment against Imelda Marcos to the extent of her interest in the Marcos estate in the principal amount of $13,275,848.37, and Roxas' estate obtained a $6 million judgment on the claim for human rights abuse. This lawsuit ultimately concluded that Roxas found a treasure, and although the Hawaiian State Court was not required to determine whether this particular treasure was the legendary Yamashita's gold, the testimony relied upon the court in reaching its conclusion pointed in that direction. Roxas was allegedly following a map from the son of a Japanese soldier. Roxas allegedly relied on tips provided from Yamashita's interpreter, and Roxas allegedly found samurai swords and the skeletons of dead Japanese soldiers in the treasure chamber. All this led the United States Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal to summarize the allegations leading to Roxas' final judgment as follows. The Yamashita treasure was found by Roxas and stolen from Roxas by Marco's men. Alright, our next reading is from Want to Know Info, and this... Remember, as with all these shows, I don't necessarily believe any of this, but it is interesting information. I think everybody should at least be aware that the information is there. And with the next article, it's going to sort of try to tie in the Black Eagle Trust Fund with 9/11 and the whole 9/11 conspiracy. I really don't know what I think about that, to be quite honest with you, but I don't even think the conspiracy is needed to explain the motivation and the outcome of what happened. Because, I mean, look at the world today after 9/11, regardless of how premeditated it was or whatever. Anyways, in November 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected to the White House. 69 days... Oh, this is from wanttoknow.info, article on the Black Eagle Trust Fund and the 9/11 tie-in. 69 days after the inauguration, John Hinckley attempted to assassinate President Reagan. 8 days prior to that attempt, there were a series of unprecedented policy changes that put George Bush in charge of foreign policy and national security. That conferred new roles and powers to Bush, including unprecedented powers for a vice president. Vice President George Bush was named the leader of the United States Crisis Management Staff as a part of the National Security Council system. Then, on March 30th, 1981, just 8 days after these powers were conferred to Bush, President Reagan was shot. The father of the assassin that put Bush in power was John Hinckley, the owner of Vanderbilt Oil. Hinckley had been giving maximum donations every year to George H.W. Bush since he started running for Congress. In The Black Hole of Guyana, the untold story of the Jonestown Massacre, John Judge painstakingly documents that Jonestown was a CIA operation for converting dispossessed and lonely refugees into assassins. In an operation that was falling under congressional investigation, the evidence had to be eliminated, and nearly all the inhabitants were murdered to prevent disclosure. A key player in the Marcos Gold would be Bankers Trust, which was taken over by Alex Brown and Sons after Bankers Trust floundered financially on its Russian loans in the mid-90s. These Russian loans were facilitated by Enron, starting in August of 1993, and very possibly were part of the Project Hammer takeover of Soviet industry. Alex Brown's involvement would bring to the forefront the names of three individuals who would play multiple roles in this mystery: Buzz Krongard, Mayo Shattuck, and J. Carter Bees. Buzz Krongard is reported as the mentor of Bees and Shattuck from their years together at Alex Brown. Additionally, he managed the merger between Bankers Trust and Dutch bank Alex Brown. Bankers Trust Zurich was a key Marcos gold holder. Krongard would move on to become chairman of the investment bank A.B. Brown, vice chairman of Bankers Trust, and executive director of the CIA at the time of September 11th. Mayo Shattuck would be reported to be the personal banker for Adnan Khashoggi and Edgar Bronfman during their partnership at Barrick Gold. He would move on to become the CEO of Dutch Bank, who would resign for unexplained reasons the day after September 11th and would not be at the World Trade Center office that day when the tower collapsed. It was his bank that was identified as the source of the illegal stock operations that indicated there was insider trading taking advantage of the September 11 tragedy. What happened to the Marcos gold after it was confiscated by U.S. agents in 1986 has never been reported. But throughout the early 1990s, the world gold market would be befuddled by the mysterious appearance of thousands of tons of gold which appeared to suppress the price of gold. In preparation for their war against communism and in the years leading up to the failed, or Fox, coup of 1991, which initiated the last days of Gorbachev and the rise of Yeltsin, Bush and a cadre of rogue KGB officials built a complex international network of banks and holding companies that would be used to take over ownership of the Soviet economy. Over 300 of these KGB turncoats who supported this operation would later be located in the U.S. in the early 90s and pensioned. Periodic CIA reports to Congress would review KGB and organized crime complicity in the takeover of Russia by the criminal elements, but all mentions of the formidable role of the U.S. would be expunged from congressional oversight and public record. In the first phase of the economic attack on the Soviet Union, George Bush authorized Leo Wanta and others to destabilize the ruble and facilitate the theft of the Soviet Russian treasury. This would result in draining the treasury between 2,000 to 3,000 tons of gold bullion. 35 billion at the time. The gold was stolen on March of 1991, facilitated by Leo Wanta and signed off by Boris Yeltsin's right-hand man. The majority of the leaked reports from the CIA and FBI suggest the theft of Russian treasury was a KGB and Communist Party operation, but what those reports omitted was the extensive involvement of Boris Yeltsin, the U.S. banking industry, and the CIA. In the second phase, Wanta, George Soros, and a group of Bush appointees would begin to destabilize the ruble. There were two major operations. The largest was coordinated by Alan Greenspan and Oliver North and implemented by Leo Wanta. With an understanding of the economic war being waged on the Soviet Union, the focus needs to turn to reports that on September 11, 1991, President George Bush was responsible for issuing $240 billion in secretive bonds as a part of this attack on the Russian ruble. There are 6 lines of evidence from 8 sources that suggest this was indeed the case. Many of these instances are corroborated with documents available on the Internet presented by those making the claims. The bonds sat for 10 years like a ticking time bomb. They had to be settled or cashed in by September 12th. The 2 firms in the U.S. most likely to be handling them would be Cantor Fitzgerald and Euro Brokers, the 2 largest government agencies, securities firms in the U.S. The federal agency mostly involved in investigating those transactions was the Office of Naval Intelligence. On 9/11, those same 3 organizations, the 2 largest government securities brokers and the Office of Naval Intelligence in the U.S., took direct hits. What happened inside the buildings of the World Trade Center on September 11th is difficult but not impossible to discern. The government has put a seal on the testimony gathered by the investigating 9/11 Commission and instructed government employees to not speak on the matter or suffer severe penalties, but there are a number of personal testimonies posted online as to what happened in those buildings that day. Careful reconstruction from those testimonies indicates the deliberate destruction of evidence not only by a targeted assault on the buildings, but also by targeted fires and explosions. In the event that either the hijacking failed or the buildings were not brought down, the evidence would be destroyed by fires. In addition to the investigative evidence being destroyed, the Federal Register reported that the physical securities held by the brokers in their vaults had been destroyed. What would be even more revealing would be the actions of the Federal Reserve Bank and the Securities and Exchange Commission on that day and in the immediate aftermath. As one of many coincidences on 9/11, the Federal Reserve Bank was operating its information system from its remote backup site rather than its downtown headquarters. The SEC and Federal Reserve System remained unfazed by the attack. All of their systems continued to operate. The 2 major security trading firms had their trade data backed up on remote systems. Nevertheless, the Commission for the first time invoked its emergency powers under Securities Exchange Act Section 12K and issued several orders to ease certain regulatory restrictions temporarily. On the first day of the crisis, the SEC lifted Rule 15C 3-3, Customer Protection, Reserves and Custody of Securities. The GSCC, the Government Securities Clearing Corporation, was thus allowed to substitute other securities for the physical securities destroyed during the attack. Collateral substitutions can and should be made with regard to immediately maturing collateral. At this point in time, the Federal Reserve and its GSCC had created a settlement environment totally void of controls and reporting, where it could substitute valid new government securities for the mature illegal securities and not have to record where was I? Where the original bad securities had come from, or where the new securities went, all because the paper for the primary brokers for U.S. securities had been eliminated. A review of the explanations for the actions of the Federal Reserve after September 11th exposes an amazingly complex web of analysis and speculation. The reports published by the Federal Reserve argue that the Federal Reserve's actions, increasing the monetary supply by over $300 billion, were justified to overcome operational difficulties in the financial sector. While impressive as the reports are, what is noted by the casual reader is that all of the Federal Reserve analysis is speculative and suggestive, using phraseology such as may have, likely, presumably, or should have. There are few, if any, definitive statements about root cause and the appropriateness of the Federal Reserve response. While the Fed was reporting outstanding account balances of over $100 billion per day, while not identifying the banks involved, the Wall Street Journal reported that at one point during the week after 9/11, BONY was publicly reported to be overdue on $100 billion in payments. The Dutch bank, which sat inside the World Trade Center, was totally decimated, reported no such account balance increase, and J.P. Morgan, the other of only two clearing banks, which uses the same traders and communications hub, reported no such increase in its account balance. No one has publicly asked, why is it that these other two banks were not seriously disrupted while the Bank of New York, which had no structural damage, seemed unable to operate? Certain key unknown figures in the Federal Reserve may have conspired, quote-unquote, with key unknown figures at the Bank of New York to create a situation where $240 billion in off-balance sheet securities created in 1991 as part of an official covert operation to overthrow the Soviet Union could be cleared without publicly acknowledging their existence. These securities, originally managed by Cantor Fitzgerald, were cleared and settled in the aftermath of September 11th to BONY. The $100 billion account balance bubble, reported by the Wall Street Journal as being experienced in the BONY, was tip of a 3-day operation when these securities were moved from off-balance sheets to the balance sheet. As reported on page 12 of a Federal Reserve document, quote, in the absence of complete information on deliveries into and out of its account at BONY on September 11th, and as a result of its assumption of settlement fails on the starting legs of blind brokered RPs, GSCC recorded $266 billion in transactions that apparently failed to settle. Continuing connectivity problems prevented GSCC from giving BONY delivery instructions after the close of business on September 11th, and prevented it from acquiring information on activity in its account at BONY during the day on September 12th. GSCC recorded $440 billion in settlement fails as of the close of business on September 12th. What appears to be the case is that the Federal Reserve imbalances reported on 3 consecutive days in the aftermath were largely concentrated on the Bank of New York, which is reported to represent over 90% of the imbalance, suggesting that the bank had been the recipient of massive fund transfers and unable to send out transfers. Overall transactions for the day of 9/11 were seemingly down even more significantly than volume, but the transactions that came in after closing were extremely large, averaging in size and packages of 35 million or more. This would be consistent with a hypothesis that $240 billion of securities were being pushed surreptitiously into the money supply. The Federal Reserve, without providing the detail required to substantiate its claims, would have the public believe that there were widespread liquidity issues, when in fact the issues were very concentrated, if not singularly, on the Bank of New York. which has been the subject of an ongoing major money laundering investigation for many years. These account balance issues resulted in the de facto expansion of the monetary supply, details of which are no longer reported by the Federal Reserve. The reported cause of this market malfunction is seemingly suspect. By comparison, the Dutch bank, which sat inside the World Trade Center, reported no such account balance increases, and J.P. Morgan, the other of two clearing banks, which uses the same traders and communications hub, reported no such increase in account balance. Additionally, while problems were being documented between the Bank of New York and the GCSS, no other institution had those problems. There is a contention that at the core of the September 11th attack, someone was planning to cover the 91-inch issuance of $240 billion in covert securities used to finance the collapse of the Soviet Union. The facts surrounding the financial aftermath of September 11th suggest this is not only possible, but that reports describing the aftermath have deliberately been misleading. The U.S. dollar money supply was significantly increased in the aftermath of 9/11. The bank at the core of the illegal money laundering by ex-Soviet criminals was the source of the increased money supply. The generally disseminated rationale for Bank of New York's operational problem seems to have affected no other bank in a similar manner or magnitude and is inconsistent with reports on the Bank of New York operations in the aftermath. A key witness who might provide insight to these issues is a statistically aberrant death. The source of the Bank of New York's $330 billion increase in assets is cloaked under the privilege of private banking. The only alleged severe disruption to the financial systems was the Federal Reserve's account balance and the security trading fails. Both systems required to hide the laundering of $240 billion in covert securities. This is not proof that $240 billion was laundered, but it provides probable cause for paying serious attention. Conclusion. And this is still reading from need to know or want to know.info. History has many interpretations, and this report has been just one of many. An interpretation pieced together from the bold admissions and revelations of insiders whose stories have been ignored and suppressed by the major media organizations. It is an interpretation of history that suggests a few determined men strove to change the world in defense of Western capitalism in ways which they felt needed to be hidden from the public. Whatever emotion or logic that is adequate to cause them to hide their actions from the public was not strong enough to prevent them from committing the acts. This is the condensed version, author's note. This is the condensed version of this story. The author cannot vouch for the accuracy of the source materials, although efforts have been made to validate the consistency of the storyline with as many references as possible. There is no single fact or reference that this story is dependent on. The author expects some details to be disputed and possibly disproved, but contends that the storyline will hold true regardless. Note from Fred. Though I doubt this was the only reason for 9/11, it was likely one of the main motivators. For what may be the most powerful single piece of evidence corroborating this theory? Click here to read the Reuters News Service. And that is the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it. Pretty interesting. And again, yeah, you never know when reading or watching anything if it's 100% true. But I say if you can find 3 or 4 people that are reporting on the same thing, there's probably something to it. At least. Alright, have a good one.